Welcome to Spiritual Studies Announcement and Commentary. Recently, I've been reflecting on the fact that I've been doing this channel, this course now, for about 3 years. As those who have followed the course throughout, you may already know that I started this initiative because it was a job. But for the last 2 years, I've been doing this pro bono, which explains a number of details about the course. For one, it explains why I've been so infrequent when it comes to certain dry spells of the course, and it shows why there is overall a lack of production value in asking for such as slideshows or in having very cleanly written out scripts, performative for what is conventional on YouTube. However, I have the desire to do the course differently from this point forward. I want to go back into what's already been made and clean up some of the audio and untouched leads given out. I want to start integrating slideshows into the lecture-based presentations. I want to also have greater editing agency and writing out agency when it comes to each of the sessions, to give them more time, to make them a bit cleaner. Not more time in duration, but more time in preparation. And I want to invest more in primary sources and academic databases and so forth. And lastly, I want to expand the material that will be brought here. I have learned history in philosophy, art history, poetics, and as it's bled through, plenty of subjects on etymologies as well. I want to bring that forward. The plurality of the material that I would be actually inspired to present, disseminate. I believe in the material that I've been making, in the sense of its efficacy and its agency, its influence that it can have on people, and I'm grateful to have this very strange position to do so. So, in order to actually facilitate these spoken desires, I've created a means of patronage, which is on Buy Me Coffee, and of which I'll put in the description. I, for one, chose this platform instead of Patreon because I feel like it's undiscussed or underdiscussed how much Patreon can take from creators by virtue of their brand name. People recognize Patreon, and Patreon knows that people recognize them. They know their ubiquity, so they can take more. I've done a lot of research, and I have instead went for Buy Me Coffee. This is both a means towards individual donation and membership tiers. I've created 3 tiers there, and I want to hear from those that would be interested in the furthering of this course and the furthering of this material, and I want to hear what sorts of perks, if any, ought to be provided by membership. I am on a line here, and what I mean is I don't want to give way to the capitalistic kind of blunder that you can often see in the content when it comes to the medium of YouTube. I want to to not divulge too far into that. I'd much prefer to stay sane. But accordingly, I want to know what I can offer in addition that isn't pandering. Any whatever. What, by extension of that, what if any changes other than my listed desires would you like to see on this course in this channel overall? I say that because I genuinely want to know. I want to inquire and I want to take it into consideration. But in sincerity, the trajectory, everything that's on this channel has come with a fair degree of, does it actually inspire me to do it? When subjects are forced, I drag my feet. So I don't want to give way. I feel like the product of a session, per se, product, I hate that word, the ineffable quality of a sincere inspiration towards it comes through. And I wouldn't want anything less for myself. And I have a lot of subjects that are just kind of sitting in stasis on the docket, both very inspired and waiting to be re inspired. On my off times, I research quite a bit, but I don't tend to do it so directedly as a session might make it seem. I mean, I suppose it's very interpretable with the comparative religious topics that I am scattered. I am all across the board when it comes to what I'm stitching together. But this is just to say that there's a lot that I have ready that I would be grateful to achieve more agency, more support, more means to get by, to be able to provide these things, to make the production value greater. This requires software to even get pictures. This requires usually subscription services to things that offer you outside of the limited public domain. All of this is more investment, not to mention the actual primary sources require investment, money, but also it requires more time. All of these things require more time. I'm willing to give that, provided some degree of support. So, without belaboring, that's what I wanted to put out on the announcement side. I I would be grateful for some sort of reciprocal quality that I can continue forward with this and improve it, but also go even further with the research material that that we at this point have all been privy to. So the rest of this is dedicated to a kind of Q&A. There was a post, a discussion post, where a number of questions came forward, and also a few pulled from recent videos, questions that being. So it starts with Martin Adel Mundo asking, would love to hear about African origins of myths and humanity. Could we affirm that all myths and cosmogony from the world are related to Africa? Or could it be assumed that other myths and folklores have their own origins from other places? There are some competing theories about the origination of mythology. One is to say that there is a kind of Carl Jungian thing going on where there is a collective archetypal access in the human psyche, that these stories are created independently from these different places with similarities because of an access to a mutual archetypal sort of collective unconscious. But there's also it's also very feasible to say that these different stories are related because of mutual ancestry. Of course, that's a natural assumption, but it gets much more confusing than that, because I think it's only going to be greater shown and greater shown and greater shown as the years go forward how much in contact the ancient world was, much beyond what is the kind of socio-normative conventional way of thinking about it. We touched on that with the absolute wayfaringness of the Polynesians, and how the Americas had chickens and bottle gourds when they shouldn't have, before any colonializers showed up. This is just to say that the interplay of story got mixed up a lot more in person, shared in person in the ancient world than we might assume. And this could also lead to corroboration. But when it comes to the first places, the oldest references that we can find to certain mythological tropes, some would point to Siberia. Some might point to Sumeria. And depending on how far you take back the trajectory, of course, there's Egypt. A strong case to see the African origination of myths is the rainbow serpent, as it was in Africa and as it was in Australia. And you could say the vision serpent as well from Mesoamerica. So there are things to substantiate that, to get back on point. There are things to substantiate that commonality from Africa, but it's a yes and no kind of answer. If the story keeps developing further and further back, of tracing these myths back, maybe there's more yet to be found to greater substantiate that as the universal home. Piccolo's son asks, what is reality, aka consciousness, aka the creator, aka God, trying to achieve? And what is the logical answer to everything? So, tall order. There's a session in the early course on consciousness, and in there, if I recall correctly, there's an interpretation to say that God is consciousness, in the sense that the sensation of stark consciousness is a third-person perspective, a traumatizing event or an ecstatic event facilitating a sort of out-of-body experience that has one experiencing or having access to some sort of omnipotence. Additionally, when somebody is under heroic doses, let's just say, of plant medicine, they often will be speaking to an other that is speaking to them. This other could be personified as Mother Ayahuasca or the mushroom, but also this could be God, in the sense that this thing, whatever this other is, seems to know everything, having such a cutting, piercing access to your being. And this could also be the Atman, as it's said elsewhere. This is just to say, those things are related, I guess, is where I was going with that. Consciousness and the creator. What is it trying to achieve? This is a personal take, but so it's, I guess, more of my opinion, which I don't give too often, but I did have a personal experience that had me believe that the end is the means. And what I means by that is the experience of it is the achievement. The very fact that things exist and have a phenomena about them is the achievement. It's done. And it is being done, and it has been done. It's doing. So that's a take. And that's also could explain why I've expressed such cynicism towards the eschaton thing. And then the question is, what is the answer to everything? And of course, it's big, so there's so much room to project into that kind of question. But I did get somewhat an eye towards the word logical, because I think that might be a problem, the logic, in the sense that I think much more of what is going on here is about feeling. Feelings lead to decisions, and feelings lead to ideations. Approach dictates philosophies. Logical is a kind of secondary. It's like a symptomatic function. There is the instinct, or there is the vibe, the phenomena felt, and then there are decisions of which are rationalized by virtue of logic. But maybe the previous answer is the logical answer. That it is. What is the logical answer to everything? It is. There's a few ways to take a stab at that. Elliot James asks, how would an animist or Taoist answer against that memory is dead? Okay. So everything has consciousness, and one of the ways that we can tell this is because everything has the ability to store memory. There's some more questions. Okay. This is, I think, best approached initially as an animist. And this is the concept of the ancestors. Death creates life, life creates death, circle, circle, circle. The fertilizer is the past food, and that fertilizer becomes a part of the soil, and the soil becomes the food. Death creates life, creates death. The stored memory is the ancestors, and the ancestors exist in all things, everywhere, simultaneously. The memory is both in the body, and ethereal, outside of the body. This access to ancestry, this collective web, is by virtue of the fact that you are ancestry. You are a compilation, or a kind of concrescence, a blooming from that tree. So memory, obviously, by scientific standards, this has also been very observed, is that it's nowhere in the mind. You can't dissect it out. And then there is the case of cell memory, especially in those that have received organ transplants. I mean, if you've met anybody that's done that, they can quickly corroborate this cell memory. But there is a sort of greater access as well, intangible, which this is. That's hard to explain. I think I definitely had to do a whole session. It's a reference towards morphic resonance. Rupert Sheldrake's morphic resonance. Look into that. You'll find that it is very animistic. And the Taoists are not far off at all. Your ability to tune into this collective memory and be a part of this collective memory is the Tao and is the ancestors. The next question, in Taoism, would yin yang be considered a polarity or opposites, and would morality and immorality be considered a so there's a way to answer both these questions. Would it be considered a polarity or opposites? It is all those things. It is a polarity, it is opposite, but it also is all one symbol, which I think, if I remember right, there's some commentary below this question that I agree with. It's all, the symbol of itself is one. So the yin yang is all the extreme polarities, the opposites in its form are all a part of its body. It's opposites must necessitate each other. Morality necessitates immorality and vice versa. This is the, I suppose, oversimplification or the cutting apart of what is in fact one. For anything to be, there needs to be contrast. And these contrasts come to bear by virtue of strata, a spectrum. And we so very often, or fairly rarely, experience anything that is so quite polarity. It's so messy, actually. Happiness can make you sad. You can feel joy from being angry. We are a soupy soup. This is the genuine togetherness, right? It's yin yang ish. It's yang yin ish. It's every kind of variable of that experience. So I would say, would they be considered polarity? Yes. Would they be considered opposites? Yes, and much more. I haven't. The next question is, have you heard of Mark Passio, who teaches natural law? And no, I haven't heard of it. I did look into it briefly. I saw that he's a part of this collective. That will be something I ought to get to in the future. Brick T asks, stuff about the Agorists who practice, or the Agorites, would that be? Who practice cannibalism for spiritual practice, as they see everything as divine, and some about harvesting the energy of the recently dead for spiritual reasons. I don't know about this specific group, but I do know from the history of kind of philosophy 101, there's this dilemma that's given in the arguments towards and against cultural relativism. And that is that this is, in fact, more of a cultural thing than it was a spiritual thing. And I'm not saying that it was to them. I'm saying this is an example of how we can understand this. The story goes that this king brought forward a group of Chaldeans and a group of Greeks. And the king asks, how much would I have to pay you to eat your father? And the Greeks were abhorred. They were absolutely disgusted at the notion and said, we could not be paid any amount of money to do something so heinous. And turn to the Chaldeans, and the Chaldeans say, you don't have to pay us anything to eat our fathers. And this is because we will not waste that of which our Father wanted to give. Now, what does this mean? Back it up a bit. If life is or if death is a nourishment for life, then why would somebody want to go to waste? Do you relate with this body as something that is soulfully yours, for one, culturally speaking, as you understand the world? And this becoming what helps people survive in other cultures it was not taboo. And I'm not justifying it. I mean, I'm not condoning it, but that could be something behind that specific subject matter. So I think it could be talked about in a spiritual way, of course, but I think it was just also very rooted in a cultural approach, perhaps. But I would have to look into the group more. Telonius Terp asks, to what measure does the demiurge and its archons take on manifestation in the world? Are they physical, abstract, or both? Well, I'm not Gnostic. Well, I don't know what I am. If we are following the Gnostic way of thinking and following the very specific texts that are considered Gnostic in an odd sort of way, then they certainly are at least capable of being physical. Both. The construction of Adam in the garden, of embodiment, that was a physical act. So, but they're both represented. They also are representative of things, of the aeons and the demiurge. So that is also abstract. So, presumably by the source material, both. Mildred Milan asks, are you going to continue Gnosticism? Do you have an opinion on Samuel Onware's books or on the sacred secretion of raising the Christos? Oh, that brings me back. I don't immediately recognize Samuel Onware's books. I do intend to get back to Gnosticism. The early session in the course, I think it was a part of like the first 5 sessions, is solely dedicated to Gnosticism, but there's much more to talk about. The Dead Sea Scrolls, the Nag Hammadi Library, and any of those sorts of books are just easy reads for me. I pour through them. I'm fascinated by them. I think it deserves to get back to the subject. Yeah, so I can't say how soon, but yes. I'm not going to talk about the raising of Christos or the sacred secretion right now, and I'll look into Samuel Onware when that time comes. Maybe I do know the name. Extension to the question: have you ever covered the call to action between magic, prayer, divination, tantra, kundalini, Taoism, tarot, New Age spirituality? So is this question asking if I've brought these all together? Because if so, then no. But magic has been getting more and more of a reference in this later part of the course, and I know prayer has recently. I think that was that the path, or was that the spiritual energy session? I'm not sure, but that was also recent, this kind of dedication towards prayer. But I also think that could be its own spiritual study session, the approach toward by different spiritualities. Magic is going to get more conversation as this course is moving forward. It's being prepped for, let's just say that. Divination got its own session in the early part of the course. I think somewhere between 10 to 30 sessions, 10 to 30. Divination, not just in its many forms, but also my personal experience as a palm reader for some years. Tantra just got a mention in this last session, and I'm happy this got brought up because I have been gifted by a number of listeners with some deep cut sources on Tantra since then. And I think it deserves a lot more context than I gave it. I gave a very overgeneralized approach at the very end of the sexuality session. So Tantra deserves more attention and more illumination. Kundalini's only got its reference in the snake mythology talk. I've been informed a lot about Kundalini by people that I've met, but it's never been something that other than in that session, that I've taken a particular interest towards. And I'm just talking about in the way of inspiration. Like, that's something compulsively that I'm going to be digging through right now. So maybe later in the course, hard to say. Taoism has its own session of, yeah, and plenty of mentions throughout. Tarot, um, scant. I mentioned there is a specific session that I did. Gosh, I hardly remember that. I do have a session on tarot. There is much more to say too. The interconnectivity between the Kabbalah, tarot, and astrology would be that would be a big one. New Age spirituality too, early part of the course, but it is in the interest to push back into contemporary subjects. The course, I think, rightly so, benefits from being mostly in the ancient past and bringing that to the modern instead of just being in the modern. And but I do feel like there is a place, a need, and certainly an interest of mine to be more divulgent of what is going on today. I got another comment that just says "review the Zohar" in all caps from Czar Sandrax. I've read the Zohar maybe twice, a few times, two or three, but that's a hard one to pierce in the way of really getting through to the book. I do think I did that whole session on Kabbalism, but I do think the ancillary materials of Kabbalism would be interesting to move into. Like the reference to gematria and that specific language, was it like the language of leaves? Something kind of ominous like that. In the attempt towards interconnectivity of these texts, this like subliminal layer, that might call to me. I'd love to get back to that, yeah, the Zohar. And I don't know who sent this, but I had it down here. Do you have a Spotify by chance? It would be easier to listen to you at work. Nice. So that's part of my stated interest in the beginning with the announcement. That's why I want to go back into the course and clean it up a bit so that I can get these files proper to share this on other platforms, audio platforms specifically, so that there is a greater access to the course. But that's an investment of time because I'd want to put it out right. So cleaning up this audio of all the stuff that I've made and then putting it all out there. So the answer is I don't have a Spotify, and I intend to get this out for greater ease of listening as support comes forward. So that's what I got for now. Appreciate this kind of informal, more off the cuff, and it's more personal than a session would be. So I hope you enjoyed it like I did.